Hi, this is Mrs. Clark and welcome to my video on polynomials. Today we're going to be taking notes for our notebook, learning about what a polynomial is. We have actually been looking at polynomials already, so you'll recognize it's not something completely new, you just haven't heard the word before. We're going to start by writing a definition. It's going to fill up most of this box, so just be mindful of your space as you're writing. But the first thing I want to talk about is the beginning of this word. Poly means many. And so this is an expression with many terms. A polynomial is an expression that can have constants, variables, and exponents. But there are three things we need to know. You can have no division by a variable. No division by a variable. And we'll look at that when we do the examples. Also, it can only have whole number exponents. So only whole number exponents. And also, it has a finite number of terms. And we know the word infinite means to go on forever, so finite is the opposite. It means that it stops. So that's our definition of a polynomial. Here's what a polynomial looks like. 5xy squared minus 3x plus 5y to the third power minus 3. This is a polynomial. So what we have before we combine like terms, what we have after we combine like terms, that's considered a polynomial. So it's made up of a bunch of terms separated by adding and subtracting. Under the characteristics, we're going to write polynomials are named by their degree and number of terms. So if we look at this polynomial we have down here under example, the degree stands for the highest exponent that we see. So we're looking through each term. This one has an exponent of 2 and 1. This one has 1. This one has 3. This one has none. So this 3 to the third power is going to be the highest exponent. So that's our degree. So a third degree polynomial is called a cubic. So this is a cubic polynomial. With 4 terms. And we're going to go over on the next page a whole bunch of things about how to name these. But this is called a cubic polynomial with 4 terms. Now, some non-examples. We said that a polynomial cannot have division by a variable. So something like 2 divided by x. That is not a polynomial, because there's a variable in the denominator. It also has to have only whole number exponents. So something like 5x to the 1/2 power is not a polynomial. Similarly, we can't have something like x plus y to the negative 2 power, because this is really just a fancy way of writing x plus 1 over y squared. And we know that from our work with logarithms. When we have this negative exponent, it's the same as 1 over the positive exponent. So because we can't divide by a variable, we can't have something like this. So we can't have fractions in the exponents. We can't have variables in the denominator, which means we also can't have negative exponents. And those are some examples of things that are not polynomials. Next thing we're going to do is go through the words specific to naming by degree and naming by number of terms. Okay, so make sure you have this paper, Naming Polynomials. Just a reminder, like we just said, polynomials are named according to their degree and number of terms. So what we mean by their degree, and we should make a note of that here so we don't forget, is the highest exponent. So depending on what the exponent is, depends on what the name is that they have. So first, if the exponent is 0, now that will look something like this, x to the 0. You probably won't see an x to the 0 power, but we know that anything to the 0 power is 1. So it'll be hidden in this way. It'll look like the number 7 or something like that. But we need to remember that that's really 7 times x to the 0, because 7 times 1 is just 7. So we don't bother writing the x to the 0. It looks like this number term without any variables. And so the name for a degree 0 is a constant. And we know that the number terms with no variables are called constants, so that works out. If the highest degree is a 1, you might just see an x, because we know that that's x to the first power, even though we usually don't write that little 1 there. If you see just an x as your highest exponent, this is going to be called linear. And we learned about linear in Algebra 1 when we were learning about making lines, and we learned about the equation to make lines, which is y equals mx plus b. So in mx plus b, you have a constant term, b, and an mx, which is a term with an x in it to the first power only, so it's called linear. Now, if we have an x squared, or an x to the second power, as our highest degree, or our highest exponent, our degree would be 2. In that case, we call that a quadratic, which you learned that a little bit about that in Algebra 1. Quadratic functions are the ones that make parabolas, the U-shaped, specifically x squared. If we have x to the third, we already talked about that one, that is called a cubic. So a degree of 3 is called a cubic. Now 4 and 5 are probably new, but they kind of break down similarly. So if you think about an x to the 4th power, if you think about words that mean 4 of something, or like cut into fourths. So the word quartic is what we use. Quart, you know, like quarters, with an IC on the end. So quartic is what we call a 4th degree polynomial. A 5th degree polynomial is quintic, like quintuplets. And if we get to 6 or 7 or 8 or 9 or 10 or anything higher, we don't have specific names that we use for them. They're not very common if there are names. So when we see something like this, this is just telling us if we have 6 or more as our degree. So it'll be x to some power, and that number is going to be either 6 or 7 or 8 or 9 or 10 or something higher. That means it's going to be the nth degree. So whatever that number is, if it's 6, it's the 6th degree. If it's 7, it's the 7th degree. If it's 8, it's the 8th degree. So these are the words that we use to name a polynomial based on its degree. There are different words that we use to name a polynomial based on the number of terms that it has. So if a polynomial only has one term, think about a word that you know that goes on the front of other words, a prefix, that means 1. So uni means 1, like unicycle is a one-wheeled cycle. Mono also means 1. So one term is called a monomial. Two terms, think about a prefix that means two. A binomial is a two-term polynomial. I bet you can guess what 3 is. Prefix that means 3. Like triangle, trinomial. And here, if it's 4 or more, we just call it a polynomial. So we're going to use this chart as we work through some examples of some polynomials, and we go through and name them based on their degree and their terms. So the next thing you want to do is grab this paper, Naming Polynomials Practice. And I'm going to give you a polynomial, and then we're going to talk about what degree it has, what's its name based on that, how many terms it has, what's its name based on that. So we're going to start with 5x to the third power plus 4x to the fourth power minus 2x plus 5. Now I'm going to grab two colored pens that I'm going to use so that I can show you where we get the information for the degree and how we determine the number of terms that it has. If you want to do the same, feel free to grab some markers. So remember, the degree is the highest exponent. So looking through here, we have a 3, a 4, a 1, and a 0. So this 4 is going to be our highest exponent. So the degree of this polynomial is 4. And if it has a fourth degree, it is called a quartic. The number of terms is determined by the pluses and minus signs. Those are what's separating the terms. We have 5x to the third, and positive 4x to the fourth, and negative 2x, and positive 5. So that's 4 different terms. So something with 4 terms we call a polynomial. So this is a quartic polynomial. So we're going to look at some more examples. Feel free to pause after you write it down to go through and try it on your own before checking to see if we did it correctly. Our next polynomial is 11 minus x. So first, thinking about the degree, we got to think of the largest exponent. So this 11 doesn't have any variables with exponents. And this x is by itself, which means it has a 1 as its exponent. So the highest is going to be first degree here. First degree is called linear. And it has 1, 2 terms. So it is a binomial. This next one I want you to pause after you write it down and try it on your own and check back. 4x to the third plus 2x to the seventh minus 3x to the fourth. So quick pause the video. Figure out the degree and the name and the number of terms and the name, and then check back to see if you're correct. Alright, so our degree is 7, because 7 is the highest exponent, so we call it a 7th degree. We take the n out and put a 7 in its place. And then it has 3 terms, so we call it a trinomial. So this is a 7th degree trinomial. Our next polynomial that we're going to do is 19. So pause the video quick and write down the degree and the name and the number of terms and the name. Alright, 19 is alone. And so that it has an x, but it's really an x to the 0, and we don't really write it there because we're lazy. So I want you to know that this constant has a 0 degree, which means it's a constant. We knew that because it's just a number, and then numbers are constant. The number of terms is 1 because 19 is one number, and it is a monomial. So I'm going to give you the next two, and I want you to go do them, and then come back and check, see if you did them correctly. So we have 5x to the 5th minus 4x to the 3rd plus 2 for this top one, and then the bottom one is 11x to the 11th plus 12x to the 12th. Pause the video, do these, and then check back. Alright, so for the next one, the degree is 5, which means it's quintic. There's 3 terms, so it's a trinomial, quintic trinomial. And then the last one. The last one, the degree is 12, so we say it's 12th degree. And then it has 2 terms, so it's a binomial. Make sure you glue these into your notebook. Make sure you ask questions if there's anything you don't understand. And I will talk to you next time. Thanks for watching.